This is Cities in Motion 2. I'm going to show how to repair a monorail that was not designed properly. This is the monorail in question right here. We have a terminating point, which is at the south of this island. And the monorail can actually be a lot longer, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend it so it goes to the mainland to the south. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to get rid of the existing monorail. But I also want to do it with care. I don't want to delete too much. So this line over here is going to have to be extended across the river. That's the river gap. And then I'm going to follow this road that goes through the center here. It's going to go through this road because I want to use the least amount of space as possible. And it's going to skip over this monorail here. And it's going to follow down. It's going to join up with this bus line. We've got an underground subway. I'll show you the underground subway. It's right there. And then it's going to follow all the way down to the next underground subway, which is right there. So that extension should bring more people onto that line. The first issue that I have is I can't delete this line because if I try to delete it, it's going to delete too much. Oh, actually that deletes the actual line. We don't want to do that. We want to delete the rail. So I'm going to turn off the line. Okay, so I'm going to delete this loop. And I'm going to use the monorail extension, which I purchased. Use the page up keys in order to change the height of the monorail. It's going to connect over to this area. It's very important to keep the transit system as efficient as possible. This allows your city to grow, it reduces congestion, and it earns you more money. I want to keep as many of these buildings as possible. So I'm going to build it straight across. And follow along the road. I've lowered it now down to a height offset of 8 meters. Now, usually you have to go over the existing highways and rail system, but in this case, the game designers placed the highway at an elevated level, so I'm actually going underneath the existing highway. And as you can see, it's very easy to extend the track. The only issue I have is that now I have to figure out what to do with the terminating point. Normally you want to connect it to another rail. However, another rail does not exist in this area. So what I'm going to do from this point on is I'm going to make a loop. And hopefully it won't destroy too many buildings. And you cannot bring the loop all the way around. It won't connect to itself. So you have to make a partial loop. And then you have to finish the loop. There's an issue here with the loop where it looks like the turn was too sharp, so it didn't construct it. So I'm going to delete it and try it again. And I'm also going to make room to place a monorail station on the loop. Okay, unfortunately it did not build it the way I intended it to, so I'm going to have to try again. It did not make the full connection to return. So hopefully one more will work. Okay, there we go. Now the loop is not perfectly circular, that's okay. On the flattened part is where I'm going to put the station for the monorail, which is going to look like that. And it's right above the green metro, which is underground. Over here you can see the connection. You've got the monorail. This is the entrance. And then you've got these other two entrances which go to the subway down below. That's what the subway looks like. There's a train in the subway right now. So I'm going to continue to build the stations for the monorail that I extended. And you'll notice that there's this orange circle, and I have to build it so that it overlaps that, and that's what gives me the coverage. That shows you how far people are willing to walk in order to get to that station. So all of my circles, those orange circles, are going to overlap as I build back to the island. Now here's a case where I want it to overlap, but I also want to be as close to the other monorail as possible. This way people can transfer between the two. There's two ways to do connections. One is to share a station, and the other one is to build the stations near each other. If they share a station, it's easier for the citizens to make a connection because they don't have to walk anywhere. But with the design that I use, they have to walk to the next stop. Okay, so the last thing I have to do is go to the original area which had that little loop and correct it, which was right over here. There's only one stop going north. I'm going to add a second stop going south. And that line has now been extended. Unfortunately, it's not operational yet. All of the stations that I just planted have to be added to the line. So what these trains are actually doing right now, you see that train just went right by. He's going to run the line, but he's not going to stop anywhere. So I have to add it in so that he actually does stop at all these new stations. He's going to go right by that station. So what this is doing is it's bringing people from the downtown area where they live to the industrial area in the south where they work. This is going to give you the morning rush. It's going to give you the afternoon rush. However, you're not going to get that leisure traffic with this route. Okay, so I've gone down. I just have to do the stops on the way up. There's probably going to be 3 more stops. And you want to make sure when you click on each stop, well, as I add each stop, you want to make sure that the yellow number in the center becomes white. If it doesn't become white, then it was not added. And if you don't want to have stops that aren't added, it defeats the purpose of having the transit system. So I'm pretty sure I've gotten all of them, which means that that line is now active. I'm just going to follow it to see if it's connected properly, and it should be. Okay, so I'm going to turn the make the line visible, and you can see now in the little map that I've extended the line all the way down into this industrial area. And this loop hopefully will be a terminating point for another line. I'll run another line down into here, and the trains can share the same station, which will be obviously more efficient. And the reason why I didn't run this line before was that I don't think this industrial area existed. Maybe some of it did, but it took time for it to become developed by the game. Roads had to be laid down, and now that they're there, it makes sense to run the line through. So here's another line up here on the west that just comes to a stop. And the reason why this line comes to a stop is because the rest of the neighborhood did not exist when I put that monorail line down. So I'm going to make an extension right here on this line. First I'm going to turn the visibility off of the route. And I'm going to delete the loop. Now you'll notice that the roadway below it is 4 lanes, and I prefer not to build a monorail on a 4-lane road. But in this case I have no choice. It fits into a 2-lane road, and obviously the other transit systems don't, such as, well, they do, but you want to have the wider spaces for things such as highway, and you don't know what you might put in the future, so it's best to keep your options available for future development. Monorail is a really good system. Each transit method that you use has its own advantages. The buses are very slow, but they're also very cheap, and they're easy to install. And the trolleys are somewhat inexpensive to run. And the trams are pretty good, but the monorails are a bit faster, a little bit more expensive, and it's the last step before you get to the train system. So they are good to use, and I'm using both. I do have trains running at the same time. There's a train network that's running north and south on this map, and they will overlap in some respect, but not completely. And there's a reason why you want to lay both down, and that is because people have different amounts of money. And the people that have more money are going to use the more expensive service, which is the train system. And the monorail is going to be for people, obviously, who have less money, but still want to get there in a reasonable amount of time. So I've got to bridge this gap over here, which requires that the train be a little bit more elevated. I'm all the way in the north, and it's time to put a terminating point. So I'm going to build a loop. And you want to build a loop with the intention that some of the other monorails might share this loop in the future. So be careful as to how big you make it. If you make it too small, you could end up with some strange traffic jams. And now I'm going to add the stations. I always use the highest quality station. I'm going to put one right on the loop. And then we're going to watch for that orange ring that you see right there. And we're going to make sure that the new stations overlap that orange ring, which is going to be about here. Now, one of the issues that we have with this monorail system is that we're putting stations in the middle of the road as opposed to at the intersections. And I prefer to put them near the intersections as much as possible. But unfortunately, we can't always do that. The people will find where they need to go. And it was the reason why this happened is because I laid down the road and I made the road a little bit longer going north and south and shorter going east and west. It's not quite as, it's not the same size as the blocks that are laid down by the game designers. Now, one of the issues we have is that on the west we actually have very little coverage for transit, which are the blocks to the left of where I'm placing right now. So that's a high priority. And again, you can see that on that northern island there's a circular loop that goes around. My experience is that they're not very effective. Now over here we only have one stop. It's already been laid down. This was where, this must have been one of the last stops before we came into the loop. So I'm going to put a stop to match it, and I shouldn't have to put anything else down. The rest of the stop should already be laid from here on out. But I'm just going to check. Okay. Now I have to find the monorail. I'm going to go to the stop, and over here it says passengers waiting, monorail line 9. I'm going to make it visible by clicking on the eye. Now I have to go to the stops that I had dropped down, and I have to add them to the route. And I'm going to do it in order. So the last stop is right here, stop number 151. And as I head north, they're all going to be new stops. I'm using the add stop feature. I'm going to click on that little square, wait for it to turn white, move to the next one. You really want to have a nice procedure down for building, for adding lines and things like that. It reduces the chance of making a mistake. Before, I was not waiting for it to turn white, and what happened was I had a lot of stops on routes that were not added. Because of the way the game works, sometimes you click on a stop and it does not register in the game. So we should have perhaps 2 more on the northern line, and then I'm going to switch to the southern route. Okay, so here's that terminating loop. Right now, this is a low density area. You can see there's a lot of grass, not that many buildings. But you have to be patient. After a certain amount of time, you will have higher density buildings. It could take many hours of gameplay in order to get those high density buildings. The other thing you're going to find, if you look at a lot of these buildings, you're going to find a lot of them are actually empty. They're supposed to have homes and workplaces, However, they are often empty. That looks like it's not the final one. There should be more. The final stop is going to be after a bridge. But I'll know when I get to the final stop because it will be white. That could be the bridge for the final stop. And if the next one is white, then I have finished this line. And I have. Okay, now this line is operational. The trains are running, the trains are going to make the stops. We need to check the monorail depot to see that we have enough trains, and we do, so this line is fine. That's how you do extensions for your lines, and it's not just for monorails. You can do the same thing for the trains, you can do the same for buses, you can do the same for trams, and you can do the same for what's called a water bus, the ferries, the ferry system. Now on this map, I want to have complete coverage for my monorails. So I want the monorail to essentially go to every other location on the map, but I want to do it in a logical manner. For example, we've got this north-south line, but it doesn't go to the landmass in the southwest. And there is a line that is over here, which just sort of ends in the middle of nowhere, which could be continued. We can continue this line to connect somewhere up over here. We've got another line over here which ends on the island, which should be extended over. And we've got these two that terminate here in the north, and they should somehow be connected so that passengers can get from one line to the next without having to do any walking. So from all of these different options, and the last option being to lay down a new line, I would prefer to lay down a new line. The new lines are probably going to have to be either on the east, because I have nothing on the east that's going from north to south, or something on the far west. On the far west, this area has very little transit, and in fact, on the east there's no transit. I have to lay buses, and a general rule, I usually lay the buses down first before I add the other transit systems. Now we also have this surface highway, which is a great place to put down a monorail track. Not so good for buses or trams or trolleys, so there's a good chance I'm going to build a monorail track right along the center of that highway. And it will probably connect to a large loop over here. Another line that goes along the south would probably be a good line. Now, one of the things that I did want to do, I have a few buildings here, specifically this one, which is Buckingham Palace, and I have another one which is you can see that this other building has 600 workplaces, but only 47 workers. And that means it's being underused. So if I want it to be used, I probably have to add better transportation to get there. And I'm going to have to figure out how to do it. Also, because I completed 2 lines, I want to save the game. When you save the game, I have Game 1 and Game 1A. And what I do is I alternate. So I'm going to save on Game 1A. And the reason why I alternate is because if the game crashes while it's saving, you might lose your save file, and I can go back to the other save file, which was before that, and restore the game to the most recent game save. So now I'm hoping that adding um, transit to those two landmarks is going to improve performance, but you have to follow the same methodology. You have to start with the buses, and you add the trolleys, and you add the trams, and then you add the monorails. It doesn't make sense to add a monorail if there's no bus traffic going to that spot yet. And of course there is bus traffic going there, but unfortunately the people still are not going to those areas. But one of the things I can do is I can delete the landmark and I can move the landmark somewhere else, and maybe that will um, increase usage because I could put it in a spot that has better transit coverage. I'm looking at the traffic, and what I'm noticing is that more traffic is going to the island than leaving the island, which is what happens early in the day. And of course, we want to alleviate the traffic by offering a better rail system or monorail system. Another option, we've got this area which used to have a loop, and I extended it, but I never destroyed the loop. And I can take this this line, monorail line number 4, and I can extend it into the landmass on the southwest, and I should have no problem with that. So that's how to extend a monorail. Um, I will do one more. Just going to pick which one I'm going to do. We've got this one right here. The way I would extend this is I would pull it south. It would go across the water. We'd have to find the path that it will follow. You could actually go between the buildings if you want. You could go right over the grass. But I prefer to do it over the road. And it looks like I've got a clear path to make it all the way to the south if I go on this road right here through the center. So that's what I'm going to do. It's going to connect to the other monorail. And I've got a couple of intersections for the buses, and it's going to go over here where I have a tram. And there's also the water bus. So we've got a lot of different options here. So it's probably going to add, I guess, another 6 stations. I'm going to turn off the monorail line using the toggle visibility function. I will delete the loop, which is done like so. I'm going to get the build function for the monorail track. You have to make sure you click the track because otherwise it will build whatever. If you had a road selected, you can actually turn the monorail into a road. You can connect them together. It's funny, but it does do it. Okay, so I have to make this little turn over here. And I'm going to continue it on this 4-lane road. At every intersection, I'm going to place the monorail. That should make a reasonably straight monorail. And keep in mind that this road might not be straight because it was probably placed by hand. When you place the road, you have to make sure that it gets placed along the curve of the land. So if the land is hilly, then you have to be careful when you place the road. Otherwise, you will get tunnels, and you don't want tunnels and bridges. So the road might not be straight because I placed it by hand with short pieces, and there's no guide to place road pieces to keep them straight. That's one of the features that's really missing from the game. Now over here we've got a slope that's going to create a little bit of a problem. I'll probably have to build this over. So I have a disconnection because of the slope of the road. And this is where it gets tricky. You can see here that the road is dipping down, and it's difficult to place the monorail because of that dip. Okay, so now I have to fix the connection. And it's going to be the same issue. There's going to be a weird change in the slope of the road. As you can see, what's happening is I went over the monorail and I tried to bring it down to the road level, but it's got to go up again, and that's why it can't connect from here to here. So I have to redo the part that crosses over the monorail. Unfortunately, it's going to delete a lot of the rail, but there's a way to prevent that from happening. Well, that's a little bit too far. So you can see it's going to delete almost the entire rail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little extension, which will be from here to here. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, so I've added a little extension. And now I'm going to delete that part of the rail, and I'm going to delete the extension. And now I'm going to rebuild going over this section, and hopefully I'll be able to make a connection right there, which I did. So now I'm going to add the stops. You can see there's stops right here. There was a loop, which is now gone. Oh, this is the wrong line. Okay, there is one stop, which came before the loop. So I'm going to add a stop alongside of it. We're going to cross the street, cross the river, I mean. Going to add another stop over here, which is in a reasonably good location. The depot that you see for the buses, which is on screen, this big blue building that's now highlighted red, is a bus line that uses the expressway, and it goes all the way to the northern island. It goes through all the islands, and it uses the on-ramps and the off-ramps, so it's technically a high-speed bus transit system, and it only has a few stops. And it's a popular line. This is another good spot. So we've got two bus lines that are crisscrossing along with the monorail. And the bus lines are depicted by the blue arrows at that intersection. You can see that there's some green circles, which obviously means that there is a underground subway in the area. I'm going to put this stop near the east-west monorail. Which will be a very short walk for people that want to do the transfer. And okay, I did not do the loop yet. So I'm going to go to the single monorail track, and I'm going to build it a little bit lopsided. You'll notice that if the turn is too sharp, it disconnects from the monorail. So you want to make sure that you don't make too sharp of a turn.